The scream of a horse cut through the Wyoming night like a knife, sharp enough to stop Ethan Miller in his tracks. One moment he was driving home through the blizzard. The next he was staring into a wall of white so thick it felt alive. The storm swallowed everything, even the sound of his old Chevy engine. But that terrible cry pushed straight through the wind and slammed into his chest. He knew instantly it wasn't the storm playing tricks. Something out there was fighting to survive. Ethan pulled the truck to the side of the buried road and stepped out into snow that rose almost to his knees. The wind hit him with such force it stole the breath from his lungs. He tugged his coat tight and pushed forward, boots sinking deep with every step. Another cry echoed through the trees. Closer this time, raw with panic. He moved faster, heart hammering, his mind racing through every fear a rancher could imagine. Shapes appeared in the storm, shifting and twisting until he came close enough to see what they truly were. Ethan froze. Two horses lay tangled beside a half-buried fence post, their legs trapped in thick iron chains hammered into the frozen ground. Snow clung to their coats. Ice crusted along their manes. Their ribs rose and fell in fast, desperate bursts. One was a gray, with frost gathering across its back. The other was a deep chestnut, its coat dulled by cold, but still glowing beneath the lantern light from Ethan's truck. They struggled with every breath, chains biting deep into their legs each time they moved. Whoever left them here had not meant for them to survive. That truth hit Ethan harder than the freezing wind. He raised his hands slowly, voice steady, though the storm nearly swallowed it. "Easy there. I'm not here to hurt you." But the chestnut thrashed harder, snow exploding beneath its hooves. The gray lifted its head, eyes wide with fear, yet still watching him with something quieter beneath the panic, something that felt almost like hope. Ethan knelt beside the stake hammered into the ground. The locks were thick and frozen solid. No tool in his truck could cut them. He thought of racing home for help, but one look at the horses, shaking bodies, told him they wouldn't survive another hour. The cold was stealing their strength with every passing minute. He reached into his coat and pulled out the soft apple he hadn't eaten at lunch. He held it out and waited. Minutes stretched tight. The storm howled. The gray horse's nostrils flared as it leaned forward. When its teeth finally crunched into the apple, Ethan felt his breath release in a long, shaky rush. Trust had started, thin as a thread but strong enough to hold. He tore off another small piece and offered it to the chestnut. The horse hesitated, muscles trembling, then snapped the piece from his hand. Its wild eyes flicked to him and then to the gray, as if following its lead. Ethan felt a spark of hope settle in his chest. He worked quickly. With slow movements learned from years of handling frightened stock, he looped a rope around the gray's neck, just enough to guide it without force. He whispered steady words as he moved. Though he knew the horses didn't understand the meaning, they understood the calm. That was enough. The chestnut fought harder, jerking against the chains until the stake groaned in the frozen soil. Ethan didn't flinch. He held out the last apple piece, and after a long, tense moment, the chestnut stepped close enough to take it. That small step changed everything. It let Ethan hook the rope gently around its neck and start guiding both horses toward the truck. Snow swallowed their hooves. Wind cut through coats. Ethan's injured leg throbbed as he pulled with all he had left, each step heavier than the one before, but the horses followed, slow and unsteady, trusting him more with each breath. When the truck finally came into view, its headlights were like a warm fire in the dead of winter. He lowered the tailgate, spread an old tarp across it, and coaxed the gray horse up onto the truck bed. The chestnut balked, tossing its head toward the storm as if tempted to bolt back into the wild. Ethan climbed into the truck bed himself and crouched low, hand open, voice calm. "You're not alone. Not anymore." After a long, shaking pause, the chestnut jumped up beside him. Ethan pulled the tarp over them and climbed into the driver's seat, fingers numb and burning from the cold. The engine groaned, tires spinning through deep snow as he pushed the truck forward inch by inch. In the rear mirror, he saw two shapes under the tarp, pressed close together, breaths rising in warm clouds. When he reached his ranch, the old barn stood dark and silent against the storm. He had not opened it in years, but tonight it felt like a lifeline. He threw open the doors and led the horses inside, spreading hay across the ground and melting snow into buckets of water. Ash and Blaze, he silently named them. One gray, one fire. As the wind roared outside, Ethan leaned against a post, chest heaving. The two horses stood beside each other, shivering but alive, their breaths filling the old barn with warmth it hadn't held in years. And Ethan felt something stir inside him too, something he thought he had lost long ago, a reason to keep going. The storm eased by morning, but the cold still cut through the valley like a blade. When Ethan stepped back into the barn, the quiet felt heavy in a different way. Ash, the gray horse, lifted its head at his approach, warm breath drifting into the air. Blaze, the chestnut, kept its distance, but no longer thrashed with every sound. Both watched him with a mixture of fear and expectation. He moved slow, careful, reminding himself that trust wasn't built in a single night. He laid fresh hay, refilled the water, and cleaned the barn as best he could. Their ribs still showed beneath thin coats, their legs raw where the chains had bitten deep, but they were standing, alive, fighting. Just as he finished spreading new straw, the barn door creaked open. Ethan's heart kicked hard, but it wasn't trouble. It was Sophie Harper, the neighbor's 12-year-old daughter, bundled in a coat too big for her, cheeks red from the cold. She carried a small bundle under her arm and a sack of carrots that swung from her mittened hand. "My mom said you were up all night," she said softly. "I brought these." Quote, Ethan wanted to tell her she shouldn't be here. He wanted to send her home before danger ever touched her. But when she smiled, shy but determined, and stepped closer to Ash, something inside him eased. Ash lowered its head at once, ears forward. The gray horse sensed gentleness like a sixth sense, and Sophie had more of it than anyone Ethan had ever met. Blaze, tense and restless, pawed at the ground, but it didn't strike or lash out. It simply watched her. Sophie offered a carrot to Ash. The horse accepted it with slow, deliberate care. Her grin lit the barn brighter than the lantern. "They're beautiful," she whispered. Blaze edged closer, snorting as if trying to decide whether she was danger or comfort. Sophie extended a carrot toward it too, but Ethan stepped forward, ready to intervene. Before he could, Blaze stretched its neck, nostrils flaring, and tapped the carrot with its muzzle. Not a bite, not trust, but not a refusal either. It was more than Ethan expected. "They're scared," Sophie murmured, "not mean." Her words hit him harder than she knew. He had lived with fear himself, years of it, stacked on grief. He knew the difference between wild and wounded. Blaze wasn't angry. Blaze was lost. Sophie stayed until the lantern burned low. When she left, Ethan watched her disappear into the snow and felt the barn fall quiet again. Ash nudged him gently as if sensing his thoughts. Blaze stood further back, but its eyes had softened. That night, something inside Ethan broke open. As he sat in the straw, exhausted and aching from the cold, Blaze began pacing in frantic circles, hooves pounding the boards. It had been calm all day, but now fear gripped it again, sharp and wild. Ethan tried soothing words, tried offering hay and water, but nothing worked. The chestnut's panic filled the barn like a storm. He lost his calm. "Enough," he yelled, his voice hitting the rafters like thunder. Ash flinched. Blaze froze. Ethan stood there, chest heaving, anger and grief swirling so fiercely that he felt the old memories claw their way back. His daughter's laugh fading in the rearview mirror. His wife's cold hands slipping from his. The empty house that never felt like home again. "I can't do this," he whispered into the silence. "I can't lose anything else." His knees buckled. He fell into the straw, hands shaking, breath cracking in his chest. Tears came harder than the storm outside. He buried his face in his palms, ashamed of the sound, ashamed of the weakness. And then, warmth pressed against him. Ash stepped forward, lowering its muzzle to his shoulder, leaning into him with gentle, steady weight. The gray horse didn't move away when he trembled. It didn't fear him when he broke. It simply stayed. Blaze paused its frantic pacing. Slowly, cautiously, it edged closer, ears tilted back, body tight with fear. But it didn't shy away. It didn't bolt. It stood with them, watching with a kind of silent understanding. Ethan lifted a trembling hand and rested it on Ash's neck. The horse didn't flinch. It breathed slow and steady, grounding him, anchoring him, giving him something to hold on to besides grief. "I'm scared," he whispered. "Scared I'll fail you too." Quote, Ash breathed soft against his cheek, warm and alive, and for the first time in years, Ethan felt something crack open inside him. Not pain, not fear, hope. By morning, his eyes were swollen, and his body ached from sleeping on the cold barn floor. But when he looked at the horses, something between them had changed. Not fully trust, but the beginning of it. That morning brought another surprise. Dr. Harper, Sophie's father, stepped into the barn carrying a worn leather bag. An old ranch doctor, calm as still water, he crouched beside Ash and Blaze, studying their wounds in quiet patience. "Whoever did this," he said, voice low, meant harm. Ethan had known it, but hearing it aloud tightened something in his chest. "They'll need time," Harper continued. "Care and caution. Horses like these don't come from accidents." Blaze flinched as the doctor cleaned a deep mark on its leg but didn't strike. Ash leaned closer to Ethan the whole time. When the doctor finished, he packed his bag, face serious. "Keep watch," he warned. "Not everyone will come with kindness." Quote. His words lingered long after he walked away. That afternoon, when Ethan returned to the barn, a thin slip of paper was wedged under the door. "Return what isn't yours. No one needs to get hurt." Ethan's blood turned cold. Someone wanted the horses back, and they knew exactly where to find them. The note stayed in Ethan's pocket like a burning coal. Every time he touched it, the fear returned sharp and cold. Someone had chained those horses in a storm. Someone had meant for them to die. And now that someone wanted them back. But Ethan wasn't alone anymore. And the valley wasn't blind. In the days that followed, people in town noticed things without asking questions outright. Mrs. Green handed Ethan extra hay. By accident, the feed store owner slipped him oats he didn't pay for. A young mechanic offered a jar of honey with a quiet nod. No one said the word horses, but everyone knew enough to help without prying. It was the kind of quiet loyalty only found in the West, the kind built through winters, storms, and shared loss. Back at the ranch, Ash grew stronger each day. The gray horse's coat shined in the lantern light, eyes brighter, steps steadier. Blaze was slower to trust, but its wild eyes softened bit by bit. By the end of the second week, the chestnut no longer shrank from Ethan's touch. It watched him with sharp intelligence, not fear. Sophie came every day with her scarf barely hanging on, carrying carrots, oats, or things she said her mother wouldn't miss. She brushed Ash gently, humming little tunes she made up on the spot. Blaze circled her at first, but soon stood beside her as if guarding something precious. And Ethan, he changed with them. Grief still lived inside him, but it no longer ruled him. The barn no longer felt like a tomb of memories. It felt alive, warm, worth saving, but danger still waited. One morning, the sheriff and a state inspector arrived. They studied the horses, scars carefully, kneeling by the injuries, with slow, steady hands. The inspector ran his finger over a deep groove around Blaze's leg and shook his head. "These marks weren't from offense or accident," he said. "Someone bound them tight. Someone tried to break them down." Sheriff Daniels nodded, face darkening. "We'll deal with the claim that came in. No judge in Wyoming will hand these animals over to men who do things like this." But before leaving, Daniels leaned close to Ethan. "Watch yourself," he warned. "Paperwork can stop some men, but not all." That night, Ethan sat in the barn long after Sophie left. Ash stood steady beside him. Blaze watched the door with restless ears. The lantern flickered, shadows shifting along the walls. The air felt heavy, as if the barn itself knew something was coming. When Ethan finally stepped outside, he saw new tracks in the snow. Boot prints, large ones, fresh, leading up to his property. Someone had come close, too close. He didn't sleep that night. But dawn brought change. The snow began to melt in patches. Spring crept into the valley, quiet but sure. Icicles dripped. Grass showed faint green beneath the white. The world softened. And with it, the horses grew restless, not with fear, but with life. Ethan opened the pasture gate. For the first time that season, the wind carried the smell of open fields. Blaze pricked its ears. Ash lifted its head. For a moment, both horses hesitated at the boundary, standing in the space between fear and freedom. Then Blaze stepped forward. Ash followed. They ran. Snow flew beneath their hooves. Their strides stretched long and powerful. Blaze kicked high, wild and sharp with joy. Ash moved steady and beautiful beside it. Their manes streamed behind them like banners. Sophie stood beside Ethan, hands gripping the fence rail. "They look happy," she whispered. "They look free," he answered. He was right. They could have run to the horizon. They could have vanished into the open land, leaving him behind. But when the sun dipped low and shadows stretched long, the two horses turned back. They returned to him. To the barn. To safety. To home. The next weeks passed in peace. The sheriff handled the claims. The inspector's report carried weight. No man who chained horses in a storm came forward again. Threats faded like winter frost. Ethan repaired the barn roof. He cleaned the old stalls until sunlight shone through the gaps. He mended fences across the property, and every morning Ash pressed close to him for a soft nudge of affection. Every evening Blaze stood watchful at his side. One warm afternoon, as golden light spilled across the fields, Sophie braided a small ribbon into Blaze's mane. The chestnut tossed its head once, as if proud. Ash nudged Ethan gently, and he placed a hand on the horse's neck without fear. "You know," Sophie said, her voice soft, "my mom asked why I come here so much." "What did you tell her?" Ethan asked. "I told her this place feels lighter than it used to." Ethan looked around the barn. The fields, the horses, the sky. She was right. The winter had been long, cruel, sharp. But something new had taken root here. Not just in the land, in him. As the sun dipped low and Ash and Blaze grazed peacefully in the pasture, Ethan leaned on the gate. This time, he didn't feel alone. He didn't feel haunted. He felt steady. Sophie tugged on his sleeve. "They chose to stay," she said with a smile. Ethan nodded, eyes warm, and so did I. Because sometimes the bonds we find in the hardest storms become the ones that save us.